No, did you need to say something? I see. Okay. So hello, everyone. For some of you, it's morning. Some of you, it's afternoon. My name is Angi Lacinak, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Exeter, hopefully in my final stages. So I'll be the chair for this session. And this session is going to be all about research in zoos. So I'm super excited to see all of your presentations because they are near and dear to my heart because I do a lot of work in zoos as well. And that's where my research is focused as well. Just a reminder before I introduce the speakers, we will try to keep this on time. So everyone will have hopefully 15 minutes with 5 minutes for questions. But if you do go to the 20 minutes, that's okay. We'll just roll the questions from your session over into the end of the session where we'll have another 15 minutes for question and discussion. Our speakers today, our first speaker up is Frankie Lawrence-Thompson. Our second speaker will be Shona Devlin. And then our third speaker of this session will be Annabel DeSmet. So did I say that wrong? That's okay. All right. You can introduce yourself to everyone as you get up there. No worries. And they are representing, Frankie is from the University of Exeter, and Shona and Annabel are both from Beacon College. So we're looking forward to hearing your presentations, and I will, Frankie, you're up first. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah, no worries. Can you see that?
Yes, you're coming through great.
Perfect. My name's Frankie. So I last year finished my MA at the University of Exeter in anthrozoology. So this talk is about my dissertation thesis, which is entitled "The Salamander in the Room: Investigating Representations of Charismatic and Non-Charismatic Species by British Zoos Online." So nice and short and snappy. Just to start off with a bit of an introduction. As I'm sure we all know, the planet is currently enduring a devastating crisis of mass biodiversity loss. It's approximated there's about 8.7 million species on Earth, many of which we haven't even properly discovered or researched yet, but they're at risk of going extinct before we even find them. So it could be asked where zoos come into this, and the simple answer is conservation work. Modern zoos, good modern zoos, have the opportunity to offer an ARC-like opportunity to preserve the genetic diversity in a massive range of species. And indeed, there are coordinated breeding programs set up globally to facilitate just that. Zoos also offer a unique opportunity to connect the general public with wildlife. They go that step further than watching a David Attenborough documentary. And also recent statistics show that 1 in 3 people visit a zoo or aquarium in the UK in 2019, which is a lot of people to educate and inspire. So even for people who are anti-zoos, I think it's hard to argue with that as a number of the pure numbers of people that we are potentially going to be able to inspire. So that's a bit of background for that. So in-person animals are one thing, but what about social media? The key sort of study that I focused on before this was by Rose, Hunt and Riley from 2018, which found that postings on social media by a variety of zoos did not represent the full diversity of their animal collections. They found that content relating to mammals was most frequently published, which I've sort of labeled the charisma problem. So this kind of comes down to the concept that some animals are more charismatic than other animals, there's multiple definitions of charisma, but essentially it's considered to be, it tends to be mammals, but it's animals that they tend to be quite large or popular in mainstream media, so you might see them in films or on TV adverts or something like that. Often predators fall into this sort of definition, and animals that we see ourselves in. So primates are a common example of that because people tend to see themselves more in animals like great apes. The study by Rose et al. Also found very limited postings on conservation and research as well. So in terms of social media statistics, the 4 zoos that I studied in my thesis had between 64,500 and nearly 840,000 likes on Facebook. which I'm sure you'll agree is a lot of people potentially going to be looking at their content. And this was really added to by the fact that I conducted my research during the first lockdown in the UK last spring. So a lot more people were spending more time on looking at screens and on social media and couldn't visit the zoos in person because they were all shut anyway. So off the back of that, my research questions were, how are charismatic animals represented in comparison to non-charismatics by zoos online? So this was taking the study by Rose et al. And just going that little bit further and going from just looking at the numbers purely of animals that have been, the species that were being posted, to looking at the way that they were represented. And then my second question was looking at whether the pandemic lockdown influenced the species posted and the themes of posts put on the zoo's social media. Now, the background to that is the fact that typically zoos' social media are run by digital marketing type people, but during the first lockdown, a number of these staff were put on furlough. So from doing my research, I learned that a lot of the keepers were posting the zoo social media instead of the marketing people. So as the people who tend to be more connected with the animals, I wanted to see if this had any impact on the range of taxa that the zoos were posting. So the overall aim of this was to provide advice for the zoos to make their social media more inclusive of non-charismatic species, which can range from just the range of species posted to use of language. And if it was found that there was a greater range used because of the keepers, whether there could be more potential collaboration between keeping and marketing departments in zoos as well moving forward. So for my methodology, I did a loose form of textual analysis. I looked at 4 UK zoos' Facebook pages over a 2-month period. So I looked at Paignton Zoo, Bristol, Chester and London. And I started my research just after the first lockdown in March and did it for a 2-month period until about May. So during that time, the entire country was in lockdown and all of the zoos were shut as well. I recorded information such as what species got posted, the key language used, e.g. was there anthropomorphism or alienating terms, references to conservation, educational information, etc. Pulled out the key themes for this and discussed them. And then as a secondary source, I used the similar technique of textual analysis for the ZSL Edge of Existence website for comparison for a website compared to social media. So for any of those of you who don't know, the ZSL Edge of Existence page is run by the Zoological Society of London and is dedicated to the promotion of non-charismatic species, essentially is kind of what the aim of that page is to do. So that was used as a sort of secondary source as well. So these are my results. So the first one you can see, this is the percentages of Facebook posts across 4 zoos split by taxonomic group. So just a quick look at that, as you can see, mammals came out top by a long way. Despite the lockdown and despite the influence of keepers tending to be the ones posting on social media, there was still a really clear heavy mammal bias across all 4 sites. A few other honorary mammals, as I've labelled them, including animals such as penguins, did make the cut. You'll have a notice if you look at the table for amphibians, there's 0 posts for both Bristol and Paignton Zoo. Now, Paignton Zoo has an entire building dedicated just to amphibians. So the fact that they didn't post a single animal during that time is quite interesting. But they did post the same red panda more than once in that period. So no frogs, but red panda twice, which I thought was really interesting. In comparison, this is the Edge of Existence website, which did contain a wider range of taxa, although it was still quite a few mammals. Granted, they tended to not be the charismatic, you know, the great apes, the big cats, those types of animals, but still there was a heavy mammal bias. But amphibians have gone up on this one, so that was something. But yeah, notably invertebrates still really, really low, which when you consider the percentage of the planet that's made up of invertebrates, when you look at species, again, is quite shocking. Interesting though, the language used on the Edge of Existence website was entirely factual based, and there was a lot greater references to conservation compared to the zoo's social media. Whereas, yeah, this is the zoo's social media with references to conservation or any explanation of how the public could help endangered species or threats to animals faced. So the highest was Paignton, but it was still only 7%. And obviously you can see there, London Zoo was 2%, which, considering it's probably one of the better known zoos from our country, not great. So yeah, delving in a little bit deeper, there was hardly any posts, including educational information about the animal pictured, particularly on the non-charismatic posts, which I thought was really interesting. So the anthropomorphism occurred a lot, and it regularly occurred on the charismatic species posts. So for example, things like references to their birthdays, uses of hashtags, the language used in their descriptions. They tended to use caption competitions, references to lockdown and use of emojis were all tended to be on the charismatic species, whereas the non-charismatic tended to use more alienating or less appealing language, which I thought was very interesting. Even little things like if they had the birth of a new animal, if it was a charismatic species, they tended to use the word baby, whereas if they had a non-charismatic species, they tended to use words like juvenile, even though they're describing what is physically the same thing. The difference in language was quite interesting when you kind of looked at it in more depth. So in my discussion, I kind of went through a lot of this. So obviously the mammal bias in the postings supports the work of Rose, Hunt and Riley from 2018, even during the lockdown with the keeper influence. So despite having the keepers on board more, there was still a really, really heavy mammal bias. Within the mammal postings, there was also a heavy focus on primates, which supported Plaus's similarity principle theory, which is the concept that humans prioritize animals we feel that we have more in common with. So again, that's linking back to the great apes. But even within that, there was other species of callitrichids featured quite a lot, for example, as well, which was interesting. There were quite a lot of non-mammal species posted that met the charisma criteria. So within birds postings, it tended to be penguins and flamingos. Although interestingly, this wasn't really the case for the non-charismatics. So the non-charismatic species that got posted didn't meet that kind of definition of having like a really big snake or a crocodilian or something. Instead, it tended to be things like tortoises and chameleons, which is quite interesting. Again, severe lack of educational and conservation posts, which links back to the argument that zoos need to portray themselves as more than just entertainment. We know they're doing this amazing conservation and research work, but for whatever reason, they're not posting about it. Interestingly, I also went into the argument of Chan from 2012, who argued that anthropomorphism has a role in conservation. So obviously, like I said, a lot of the charismatic posts were done in a very anthropomorphic style, but is that necessarily a bad thing? Is still, you know, that's kind of up for debate. So looking ahead to the future, like I said, the heavy use of anthropomorphism is interesting in the context of the argument that humans are more likely to anthropomorphize when they feel lack of social contact, which, considering the context that I did my study during the lockdown, was particularly interesting. And again, there's also been research that argued that anthropomorphism can be linked to empathy. So is there an argument that we should be using anthropomorphism on all the posts? So should we do this for non-charismatics as well? But is this leading away from the education, research, conservation, science type background that maybe zoos are still trying to promote and is linked to in their mission statements? Again, very open-ended. The alienating language, again, this links back to work on biophobia and the importance of the way that non-charismatics are represented can influence this. I'm sure we've all seen the argument multiple times that you're more likely to try and save something that you care about. And if non-charismatics are being represented in an alienating way, then is that something that we need addressing? For future research in this area, I mean, there's a ton that I could have done. I've sped through this presentation because there's so much that I could talk about here, but deeper examination of the engagement and comments on posts for charismatics versus non-charismatics would be a really good one. I wasn't able to go into the comments just because I didn't have capacity, but again, that would be a really, really interesting area. And further analysis of zoos in lockdown, again, there's a lot to be done there, particularly, just looking at how the animals themselves reacted and stuff. There's a lot more work that can be done on how zoos have handled the lockdown as well. But again, lots and lots I could talk about, but not enough time. So yeah, I think that's me. Don't think I've gone over time.
No, you actually came in a little under time. Perfect. So really, really great presentation. Great job. Really interesting work. I'm going to go straight to our question board. We have one question that just came in. Let me get over to it. I'm trying to use two screens. Martha asks, how do you think the zoo's need for marketing and public interactions is the reason for this lack of non-charismatic species? And also the lack of putting educational and conservation info on the post is to encourage more people to view the page. Is the education seen as boring and not interesting, grabbing enough to post on the social media?
I think, again, that's a really interesting area. And again, something I'd be interested in looking at in terms of future research is to sort of why. I think there's definitely an assumption that people are more interested in the charismatics, but I don't know if that's been tested as true. And again, linking that back to education, interestingly, there tended to be more educational posts about the non-charismatics. So it was almost like, oh, well, we can't say something cute about it, so we'll give you a fact about this insect or this frog or whatever instead, which, yeah, is quite interesting. But I don't think there's been a lot of research done into why that is. So sort of investigating what the public would like to see from a marketing perspective, again, would be really another really interesting area to look at going forward, I think.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. A lot of my research now is looking at public perceptions too, and there is quite a bit of research out there showing that people want to, they're most interested in the charismatic megafauna, and it's hard to get them interested in the less charismatic animals. So I think that's probably why the marketing teams are doing a lot of that. But it's interesting. Some of my research actually looked at an alligator in comparison to an elephant. And when he was presented in kind of an anthropomorphic way, where they talked about his relationship with his keeper and showed some interactions between them that seemed to demonstrate a relationship, people were blown away by it and thought it was even more incredible than seeing the tiger interact with their keeper. So I think if people did more of it, they would, people would.
Chicken and egg thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be more interesting. All right, let's see. Tom is asking, have you been able to interview the zoo's social media directors to get an idea of why they chose what they chose?
I haven't, no, unfortunately, because I actually work for the National Zoo Association in this country, and unfortunately a lot of staff are still on furlough or have been made redundant, which is obviously really difficult at the moment. So no, again, that was another area that I'd sort of listed in my areas for future research, was to talk to the people behind the social media and sort of finding out why did they post what they post. And again, with the keepers as well, I don't know whether, again, speaking to them would be a case of interest of like, why did they, when given the opportunity, why didn't they take up the chance to push the animals that we all know that they're passionate about? So yeah, very interesting.
All right, I'll take, I think we can take one more question. So we'll take Poppies. She says, I'm interested in the point made about prioritizing species which humans feel more relatable to. I'm wondering if you have encountered any research suggestions that humans also feel this way with other humans. Do you think we could learn about the effects of this in a multi-species context from understanding the psychology with our own kind?
I must admit, I haven't done a lot of the human research because I think part of my problem is that I like animals a lot more than people, which is probably where I've gone wrong on that. But no, the brief studies that I read, you're welcome to contact me and I'll see if I can find the references for the stuff I did looked at. But the similarity principle psychology research is really interesting for that area of kind of looking at how we connect both with them and with each other, and the lenses through that. So yeah, there is stuff out there. I just think it needs more reading.
Great. All right, so thank you very much, Frankie. I'll ask you to go ahead and take your presentation down, and we'll be ready for Shona next. And again, if we don't get to your question, we'll probably get to it at the end of this block, because there'll be time for more questions there for everyone. And then we'll also post these on the AIP website. All right, Shona, can you share your presentation? All right, perfect. All right, I'll just let you take it away whenever you are ready.
Okay, hello. Having trouble finding the unmute button there. All right, can you see my screen?
Sorry, yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, hello. Let me just pull this up real quick, get everything all set here. Okay, so hello and welcome. I'm Shona Devlin, and this is a preliminary analysis of zookeeper attachment to animals by taxonomic groups and the potential influence on welfare. This study was conducted through the Department of Anthrozoology of Beacon College in Florida by myself and my cohort, Allana Wheeler, with assistance from our department head and mentor, Dr. Ogle. So a little bit of background. According to some, little is known about the actual extent of animals and humans' bond within the context of zoological institutions. Therefore, we're still unaware of if those bonds represent advantages or disadvantages in terms of zoo animals' well-being and what the differences there are between zookeeper and animal bonds, if any. The high fear of humans and various farm animal species has been associated with reduced egg production, growth, food conversion efficiency, product quality, sexual activity, and increased aggression and handling difficulties. A lower fear level towards familiar people than unfamiliar people has also been found to exist in zoos between animals and their keepers. And several studies do give evidence to show strong correlations between positive keeper-animal interactions, positive responses from animals, and positive animal welfare, especially in mammals. Keepers also report having a strong bond with the animal helps them to achieve greater degrees of care provided. Studies have been conducted to show that zoo professionals report a high level of knowledge and empathy for the animals they care for regards of the species they work with. Additionally, previous work has shown that the bond between keeper and animal is more influenced by taxa-specific bonding and more influenced by direct contact rather than the actual taxa itself. Due to the similarity to humans and dissimilarity, fish have not historically qualified for sympathy. However, due to the recent interest in the cognitive abilities of fish and their emotional capabilities, the effects of species imbalance have caused an increase in sentience advocation, as we have seen. And species differences mediate social attitudes, and when it comes to policy priorities such as welfare programs, it likely holds a biased influence. The study of bonds with non-mammalian species are limited in general, but are lacking even more so within the context of zoological institutions. So researching using farms demonstrates the importance of measuring the bond and interactions with animals as it directly impacts welfare states. Having a complete understanding of the effect of positive human-animal bonds and human-animal relationships between animals and their caretakers in zoological settings is critical in establishing these new animal welfare programs. So for this study, my data was collected using an online questionnaire where participants were asked to provide demographic information, including information about their current professional role in a zoological institution. A second section of the questionnaire contained questions about the participants' perception of welfare in their zoological institution. And the questions in this section were modeled by those by Carlstead, Paris, and Brown in their 2019 study. And the third and final section of the questionnaire was the Lexington Attachment to Pet Scale Score, or LAP score, as I will continue to mention it. Similar to the approach used by Hosey, Burke, Shaw, and Melfi in their 2018 study, in which the word pet was then replaced with the word animal. So recruitment was completed through a convenient sampling. The research team provided a copy of the online questionnaire to contacts who work professionally as a zookeeper in regionally accredited zoos, and recruited participants were asked to share the questionnaire with their colleagues, as well as through other communication channels. And responses were collected for a total of 5 weeks. All participants remained anonymous to the research team and were at least 18 years of age and must have been employed in an animal care capacity at a zoological institution. And in order to be included for the analysis, all parts of the questionnaire must have been fully completed. So the questionnaire was completed by a total of 153 individuals, and a total of 113 responses were used for my analysis. Nearly all participants were employed in a regionally accredited zoological facility in North America. All other participants were employed in an unaccredited related zoological facility. So these facilities included natural history museums and nature centers that contain a live animal collection. The participants had an average of 7.8 years of professional experience caring for animals in a professional capacity, and nearly all participants identified as Caucasian female. All vertebrate taxonomic groups were represented in the study. When asked which taxonomic group represents the majority of animals under their care, mammals were the most common, representing about 78% of responses. So you're seeing again that mammal role. So there is a statistical difference in the average LAP score and the taxonomic grouping. Marine mammal professionals self-reported the highest mean LAP score. The mean score for terrestrial mammals, birds, and reptiles were similar in nature. The difference is not observed based on participant factors, including years of professional experience. There appears to be no relationship between the number of actual professional years worked and the LAP score, which I thought was very interesting. When broken down further, those who work with marine mammals, particularly cetaceans, demonstrated the highest mean LAP score. Surprisingly, those who work with a domestic species of mammals demonstrated the lowest mean score compared to other mammals. Similar to the literature, those individuals often have the most direct physical interaction with animals on a regular basis and demonstrate a higher LAP score compared to those who do not have that regular contact. So there appears to be no relationship between the overall perception of welfare influences and the taxonomic group of animals representing the majority of animals under a participant's care. Participant demographics do not appear to influence mean score related to the perception of welfare influences. There appears to be no relationship between the number of professional years worked and the influences of welfare score either, but there was a relationship between participants' LAP score and their average perception of welfare score. And the observed differences in mean scores for individual questions can be observed in the different taxonomic groups. These differences are not observed when examined by the motivation to join the profession. This difference is particularly true for measures of relationship development or bonding within an animal. The mean score was consistent across all motivations for joining the field, for believing that their job gives the animal a higher quality of life and that the animal's only interest in them are because of food provision. Those who enter the profession due to their interest in science were more likely to hold more favorable views of how their colleagues treated the animals and hold a stronger belief that they have a bigger impact on the animal's quality of life compared to those who entered the professional career due to their interest in conservation or their love of animals. So participants were asked which animal taxon they believe typically have compromised welfare in zoological institutions. And of the listed animals, 54% listed were mammals. So large mammals were named most frequently by participants, with primates and cetaceans also frequently named. Participants also listed non-mammals, including birds, invertebrates, and fish. And in addition, 18% of all participants stated that they believe that no animals under human care in their zoological institution had compromised welfare. So examination of responses demonstrated an average of 25% of participants listed a taxonomic group of animals they work with on a regular basis. And this trend is also observed in almost all mammal families, including primates. However, all Aquarius stated that they believed fish were actually the animals with compromised welfare. And those who work with elephants and rhinos frequently named primates or cetaceans, but did not list any animal species under their own care. Almost all participants, 90% in fact, who stated no animals have compromised welfare worked with a mammalian species, and about 25% of those responses were provided by those who work with cetaceans. So statistical validity was not achieved in this study due to low numbers in non-mammalian categories. As such, several findings in the study could have differing outcomes should more participants be recruited, which I do hope to do in the future. And additionally, the welfare questionnaire had to be modified in order to prevent participant fatigue. As such, the reduction in questions could have impacted the overall participant score as a result. And the study primarily relied on quantitative methods, which limited a deeper understanding of the participants' reasons behind the responses. So the average lap scores of 39.88 for the study were higher than the lap scores reported by Hosey, Burke, Shaw, and Melfi in their 2018 study, which had a mean of 32.89. Additionally, data in the study demonstrated a higher degree of variation than the Hosey study, and findings in the current study remain lower than that of the companion animal score reported by Hosey of 47.54. They also remain lower than the lap scores reported for other companion animal studies as well. Participants who worked with mammals were more likely than any other taxonomic group to state that they chose to work with an animal care professional in their zoological institution or aquarium due to their love of animals. But in contrast to that, the participants who stated that they work primarily either with fish or reptiles were more likely to state that they entered the profession due to their interest in science and conservation. And I saw that differing response wasn't even something that we were particularly looking at, but was very interesting finding. The animal care professionals have demonstrated bonds with the animals under their care regardless of the taxon. And even though these bonds are not as strong as those held with companion animals, the bond also appears to influence the overall perception of welfare. That's very important there. And the presence of this bond has the potential to directly impact the quality of care provided to animals in zoological institutions. So the bond between humans and animals has been demonstrated to be very complex, and essentially in professional environments where the bond is directly linked to professional interests. When combined with the literature, the findings from the study demonstrated that animal care professionals create bonds with their animals and develop a high level of empathy for them. The implications for zoological managers demonstrate the importance of understanding the connection that animal care staff have with their animals and the influence that this bond has on the welfare of the animal. The study also demonstrates the importance of providing welfare training to those who work with fish, reptiles, and amphibians. So an analysis of attachment should be extended to represent invertebrate species, as they are a staple in most zoological collections across really the entire world. And additionally, similar studies can be completed to compare the difference in human-animal bonds within zoological context in other cultures, and examine the influences of culture on that creation of bonds between zookeepers and their animals. So qualitative research should definitely be completed to uncover the specific variables that influence the strength between zookeepers and their animals and that bond there. And due to the study's findings, an exploration into the bond and specific operational context of a professional's application of welfare should be examined, particularly those who work in a professional capacity with cetaceans. This examination can be extended to an examination of other influences such as personality and personal experiences, of course. And again, I would just like to thank my faculty mentor and advisor, Dr. Brian Ogle, as would my cohort Allana Wheeler. Additionally, I would like to thank the Field Taxon Advisory Group for their support and recruitment of participants. And I would like to thank you all for your time and interest in my presentation. And if there's any questions, I'm free to answer those now. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shona. That was a great presentation. Really interesting findings. If you want to go ahead and unshare your presentation, perfect. That way we can see you a little better. And if people want to type questions into the comment box, that would be great. I wondered if you could just quickly explain again to everyone what exactly the LAP score is and how it's determined.
So the LAP score is a Lexington Attachment to Pet Scale Score, which is typically used in evaluating companion animals and the bond between owners and that animal. And we readjusted that to use it for the purposes of this study with the zookeepers and their animals that they are primarily caring for.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Shona? Thomas asks, do you think those bonds are necessary for good care?
So there's definitely a lot of implications that we saw from the study that need further looking into, that definitely suggests that there could be advantages to the bond between zookeepers and their animals due to the level of empathy that increases. It seems to have impact on their welfare perception. So overall, I would say that the bonds, I wouldn't state them as necessary for good care, but I do believe that this study indicates that it does present advantages. But again, due to the lack of non-mammalian species included, further examinations needed to make a real response to that.
Okay. And I apologize. I think I've been pronouncing your name wrong. It's pronounced Shona, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're all good.
Okay. And Frankie asks, what taxa do you think would benefit most from increased work in bonding?
So I'm not sure about what taxa for bonding specifically, as we saw a lot. I mean, we definitely saw a very high amount when it came to marine mammals. That was very much out there. The rest seemed to pretty much even out, and it was mostly the perception of welfare that was the more concerning effect, especially when it came to fish, as most aquarists all stated that they believed that their fish had compromised welfare within their institution, and that was a little bit alarming there to see, but important.
Yeah, I've worked as a consultant in aquariums too, and I wonder if some of that came from the fact that in very large aquarium exhibits that are designed to kind of replicate a more natural ecosystem, there are predators, there's all different types of fish and turtles and eels and things like that. And occasionally it does happen that a shark would take a fish or something like that. I wonder if some of that played into it, the natural predation that takes place in some of those places. Just an interesting thought. Let's see, Sam has asked, she says, thank you for the fascinating presentations. She was wondering how much input keepers are allowed in relation to care decisions, for example, euthanasia or quality of life in general. Did you get any information on that?
No, it definitely depends on that institution, and we use such a wide variety of accredited zoos across all of North America, along with those few nature centers that had actual live animal exhibits. So that in particular, we do not have the data for, but it's a very interesting point that she brings up.
Yeah, Sam, I can speak a little bit from some of the zoos that I work with that in many cases, the keeper staff, the experienced keeper staff are allowed to weigh in somewhat, but definitely the decisions to euthanize and things like that are usually made on a executive level management level. So it's usually the head veterinarian, the manager of that area, the general curator. It's usually that type of level. I think they definitely have conversations with the keepers, but they're definitely not the ones that make that final decision in my experience. I don't know if that's true everywhere, but it's definitely been true in several facilities that I've worked with.
I've definitely heard that noted around American zoos and things as well.
Yeah, and it might be different in different countries. I don't know, but at the other places I've worked in other countries, it was the same as well. So I think it's kind of across the board. And then I will take this one last question. Do you know the percentage of keepers that responded that were primary keepers always working with certain animals versus swing or shift keepers that covered multiple areas and were working with a variety of animals? That's a really interesting question. So were they in one area most of the time, or did they work all over the zoo?
So I think it was pretty much varied across the board, especially when it came to mammals and even marine mammals. Usually the aquarist, of course, would stick pretty much to just the entire taxa. Same with mammals. So I would just say a variety usually, rather than a primary species.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that really interesting information. Your study was well done. So good job. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
All right. So our next speaker, the last speaker for this session, is Annabel. So
Hi,
Annabel, are you ready to share your presentation?
Yes, let me pull it up. Just gonna swap spots here for a second. Where's the, oh yeah, I see it. Is it this one?
Oh, I already have it on my.
Sorry. Okay. Yep, so let me share screens real quick. Alrighty. That is not it.
Sure.
It should be this one.
Oh wait, no, it'll be screen.
It's just gonna be screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay, there we go. We can see it now.
Perfect. So, hi, I'm Annabel DeSmet, and I'm an undergraduate student in Beacon College's Department of Anthrozoology. Today, I'm speaking on North American Felid keepers' perception of welfare and the implications this has for zoo management. So, for a little bit of background, animal welfare, as we know, extends beyond preventing cruelty. It means providing a life that is, by all accessible standards, enjoyable for an animal. Previously, these assessment standards were based on the resources provided for an animal, but now extend to evidence-based assessments of individual welfare. Humans have been recognized as a critical part of zoo animal welfare, including the interactions with the animal care staff, as Shona has mentioned in her presentation. The bond an individual shares with an individual animal is particularly important when examining the issue of welfare, especially in captive wildlife. The strength of the individual bond is the potential to positively impact welfare and overall quality of husbandry provided to a particular animal. In the context of Felid keepers, the bond shared with the animal can be directly influenced by the amount of direct contact with the animal, including protected contact systems. The practices employed by animal care staff are critical as their interactions can directly influence the outcomes of the relationship with the animal. Previous findings suggest welfare standards are not always guaranteed and require complex assessment tailored to both species and individuals, and assessing for bias amongst keepers may be even more important. So there are 3 recognized factors that directly influence Felid welfare in captivity. That is space, access to hiding places, and social environments. Daily patterns in their behavior are often pretty static. They will engage most of the day in passive behaviors and short bursts of activity, primarily during times of human interaction or husbandry routines. Maladaptive and stereotypic behaviors are often present in felids who are experiencing frustration or anticipating specific time of day events. So this study set out to examine the perceptions of felid welfare in zoos and elucidate the factors that influence an individual animal care professional's acceptance and recognition of welfare. Understanding the factors that influence perceptions and delivery of welfare are critical to ensure that welfare programs are successful. This is particularly true for AZA accredited institutions as they navigate increased accreditation standards related to welfare assessment. So data was collected using an online questionnaire. We used 38 total questions, 6 were open-ended and 32 were Likert scale questions. Questions were adapted from those used on a canid welfare study in 2020, as well as a keeper elephant bond study in 2019. For the study, the decision was made to remain within the welfare criteria described in Bramble's 5 Freedoms, rather than moving to the domains described by Meller, because we wanted to ensure participant understanding of welfare, as not all zoological institutions have fully adapted welfare measures following the domain-based system. And we took responses for a total of 5 weeks. Recruitment was completed with the assistance of the AZA's Felid Taxon Advisory Group and participating institutions. Participants responded to the survey anonymously, and all participants must have been employed at a zoo or aquarium at the time of the survey and must have been actively involved in the care of at least one felid species as part of their regular responsibilities. The questionnaire was completed by a total of 161 felid keepers, with 121 being included in the analysis. All respondents included were at AZA facilities in North America. So the demographics of the keepers, they had on average 12.5 years of professional experience as animal care professionals, with an average of 11 years of experience with felids in particular. Almost all participants identified as female and were an average age of 36. Only 4 participants stated that they had no college degree, but most participants had an undergraduate degree, and that was like 102 of them. Only 14 individuals stated that they had a graduate degree. Approximately 60% of participants stated they did not select their current professional role to work with felids specifically. And when asked about how much of their days specifically spent working with felids, answers were pretty evenly split. Approximately a third of the participants say that felids represent a majority of the animals under their care and a majority of their day. A third state that felids represent about half their routine time. And a third stated that felids are a part of the routine, but not a significant portion of their time. And participants averaged about 3.5 hours per day working directly with felids. Approximately 80% of participants stated they have attended professional development courses related to animal care or animal welfare or associated topics. Of those who attend professional meetings or conferences, less than 10% stated that they rarely attend presentations focused on animal welfare. Approximately 21% stated they always attend, and 30% stated that they attend most of the time. 67% state that their facility offers training to animal care staff on animal welfare, and 32% of participants believe that there is not enough training or information on welfare available. So participants were asked to rate their perceived importance of the 5 freedoms, as well as their perception of the freedom being delivered or fulfilled. So as you see here on the chart, most people listed the physical domains as being more important than the cognitive domains. And participants believed that animals were being provided adequate access to food and water, but the animals do not have access to adequate physical environment. When examined by species, there was no observable difference in the mean score for importance of the 5 freedoms. However, those who work with larger species of felids like lions and tigers reported a lower mean score of the 5 freedoms being fulfilled compared to smaller felids like bobcat and lynx. This difference is statistically significant, and there is no significant difference in the importance of the 5 freedoms. So participants were also asked to describe what can be done to better the welfare of felids in zoos in general, as well as what their facility could do to improve the welfare of felids. And there were 3 distinct themes. So we have all of the qualitative data listed out here in this chart. The main themes were larger exhibits that are more dynamic and complex, more attention to behavioral husbandry, and better options for diets and presentation of diets. Responses vary greatly, but did reflect the rating of the fulfillment of the 5 freedoms. The freedoms perceived to have the lowest fulfillment were the most represented in the qualitative data. The mean bond for felids was 3.76, which was similar to the bonds that participants reported having with other non-felid zoo animals. So there is no statistical difference between the bonds with felids reported by those who sought out their position specifically to work with felids versus those who didn't seek out the position. Additionally, there appears to be no relationship between education level, sexual orientation, small or large cats, as well as the species of felid on the strength of a bond developed with zoo felids. Now, all participants stated that they find their work with felids to be meaningful in some capacity. On a scale of 1 to 5, average happiness level to work with felids was 4.62. Using responses that could just be sorted into traditional large cat and small cat groupings, a difference in job satisfaction could be found. Those who work mainly with felid species that could be named a small cat demonstrated a higher job satisfaction measure compared to those who work with larger felid species. Those who reported that their facility does not offer staff training on welfare topics were less likely to state that they were very satisfied with their job. However, there does not appear to be a difference in the reported levels of job dissatisfaction between the 2 groups. Those who have not attended a professional development course on animal welfare were more likely to report a lower level of job satisfaction than those who have attended professional trainings. So the relationship between job satisfaction and the fulfillment of the 5 freedoms is positively correlated, and this is important to look out for. The ability to meet the welfare needs of animals impacts overall job satisfaction. And additionally, this decrease in job satisfaction can result in a decrease in the quality of care being provided for the animals. Zoological managers need to be aware of the relationship between the human caretaker and the animal, including the strength of this relationship. The bond an individual holds with their animal has the potential to increase overall welfare of the animal. And animal care staff need to have access to animal welfare education, as well as the ability to participate in professional development on the topic. Access to welfare education and the ability to address welfare concerns directly correlates with job satisfaction. And I would like to thank my faculty mentor and advisor, Dr. Brian Ogle, and the Felid Taxon Advisory Group for their support. And yeah. So if there's any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Annabel. That was a great presentation, really interesting. Again, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat box, and we'll take a few minutes specifically for this presentation to ask some questions, and then we'll open it up for all the presentations. I did have one question while we're waiting on some people to write in the chat box. You mentioned that the keepers reported spending about 3.5 hours per day working directly with felids on average. And I wondered if there were any specifics around that. Like, did they mean 3.5 hours working like FaceTime with the cats, or does that include like while the cats are out on exhibit, cleaning their inside holding and that type of thing?
I think it's more direct contact. I would need to check into that and actually look at my original paper.
Okay.
But yeah, and that is averaged out between the groups. So there is the outliers of people who spend most of their time with felids versus those who don't spend a lot of time. So
okay, very interesting. So let's see what kind of questions we've got here. Tom says, it seems like despite their satisfaction with the job, there is a pretty substantial amount of dissatisfaction with how their zoos deal with feeding, space, etc. I wonder what you think about that disconnect.
Well, I think that it's really important to see what these employees are seeing. There is going to be a disconnect, and I think you're going to be critical of your place of employment, and these people want the best for these animals. They do have bonds. We know this. We've measured this, you know, and we are constantly improving welfare standards. This improved animal welfare is a lot more of a recent concept than a lot of people like to think about. And we just have to actively work on continuing to improve to the best of our ability.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot of work on behalf of the AZA in particular, just in the last few years to impose a lot of new, very, very time consuming on the part of the zoos, animal welfare standards and measures. So they have to actually be measuring animal welfare for all of their species now, which is relatively new in the last few years. So I agree, there's a lot of new efforts out there. Sam says, again, another very interesting project. So thank you. As she mentioned in her talk, she's very interested in she's very much a qualitative researcher. And so she's wondering how helpful it is to try and quantify emotional attachment or empathy, which are inherently subjective.
It's somewhat helpful, but they can't exist without each other. You definitely can't just quantify entirely qualitative data, because I think you're right that emotional attachment and stuff and empathy are very subjective. But at the same time, just to get a good look at a general demographic, it can be helpful to quantify things the best we can. And hopefully things will improve moving forward as we continue to research our relationships with animals and emotions in general. So extending beyond just zoo work, but psychology as well.
Yeah, and I think you might have found this as well, Shona, that zoos a lot of the zoo management teams are still very stuck in kind of an old zoological mindset in that they want all quantitative data. So they're coming around, and I think they've made a lot of progress, but in my research as well, I had to incorporate some quantitative data because otherwise they don't see it as being as useful as all qualitative data.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's also very easy to reduce something to numbers And adding in emotions adds complexity, and some people don't like that. And people
And some
will need
people
to
don't
change.
believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I had one of the people that had to approve my project that I did at Zoo Tampa. He approved it, and we're actually friends. So this was meant in the best way, but he said, I hate these kind of projects because you can't know if how an animal feels. So trying to look at their emotional state is worthless. So yeah, so there's still some of that. Does
Yeah.
anyone else have any questions? At this point, we'll just open it up to all of our presenters for this block. If you have a question at this point, maybe instead of putting it in the chat box for me to read it, it'd be great to hear from you